Well, thank you all again for being here. We've lost some of our audience, but listen, we had a much larger and more attentive and more engaged audience here this morning than we typically have in our courtroom in Austin. And we really appreciate your hospitality and your attention to these arguments. We're glad you're here and happy to take questions and have a conversation with you about what we just saw or about any questions that you have at all about the court.
Thank you. My name is Bonnie Worstel. I'm a 1L here at Baylor Law. So a lot of my classmates and I are having our first moot court exercises next week, which we're really excited about, obviously, maybe a little bit nervous. And so I was wondering if you could share any advice that you have about being an effective advocate for an appellate court, just as your perspective on judges. And then whether you have any general do's or don'ts for us that you see maybe come into your courtroom that you're like, this is a really good way to do things, or this is a terrible way to do things, don't do this. So would really appreciate that insight from you all.
Justice Young?
I think that the best thing that you can do in arguing before an appellate court is to pretend like you're an appellate judge beforehand. Think what it is that you would really want to know. What are the hardest points? If you can know your opponent's case better than your case, that's good because you'll know what the weak spots are. You prepare for them, anticipate the questions, and answer as directly and clearly as you possibly can. Have a nice conversation with us. Stop talking when one of us starts talking, but it's a nice conversation with that one caveat, and it'll feel like a great experience.
Any thoughts, Justice Sullivan?
As the most recent to make the switch over to this side, I would say try to have empathy for the audience that you're talking to and what you're trying to persuade them to do on behalf of your client. Remember that, especially when you're a new lawyer or when you're doing moot court, you have one matter to get ready for. And the people sitting on this side with the black dresses on have a lot of things that they're having to think about. One thing that I always looked for when I was at the podium was what are the things that folks are writing down? I mean, our arguments are recorded, which is a great resource to bench and bar and to law students. And so we can always go back and see, they said that it was at paragraph 2 and at paragraph 4. But if you can be outside of your own head enough to be watching your audience and see, oh, they were writing that down. And what were they writing down or what were they leaning in for when your friend in opposition is up there too? Those are the things that this is your opportunity, legally and ethically to share things with us that will help us, do the work that we've taken an oath to do.
I'm going to say in your case, you've already got good eye contact and engagement. Speak louder. Some of us are getting a little older.
I'll add to that in terms of what you might do at home. It's prepare, and a good way to do that is to do it out loud, in your mirror, with a friend, so that when you take the podium, this is not the first time you hear yourself going through the argument. So video record yourself, ask for feedback, and so that when you're here, you feel nimble and you feel like you're able to not just recite your presentation, but really listen to what the court wants to know about and really drill down on the issues that they are focused on. So prepare, but then also prepare to abandon your preparation, your presentation.
Yeah, also keep in mind that the opinions that we will issue will apply to a broader, to everybody in the state of Texas. And maybe the facts are a little different and help us out in making sure that when we come up with our opinion or the reasoning that you will help us prepare for that and keep that in mind.
And don't get thrown off by it.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we'll ask questions that really don't have much to do with your particular case. But again, like Justice Devine said, we're deciding cases that are going to apply across the board, and we have to be very careful about that, so don't let it throw you off.
And when you're preparing too, I think it's great to have sort of notes of the main points you want to make, but don't script it out. Don't write out like every word you're going to say, because you're never going to get to say it that way if you've got an active bench, which most of the time, hopefully, you'll have. And really, that's what you want as an advocate once you're out in practice, is the questions, because you've already had a chance to file a brief, and we have all of the written arguments. And so what you hope you get as an advocate is the questions from the court, where maybe they're having trouble understanding and getting to where you are on something, and we're saying, I'm having trouble, can you help me with this? And even if we're not presenting it in that way, that's mostly what judges are asking for when they're asking questions, is how can you help me understand your argument so that you win? And so those questions are really a gift. And sometimes, as Justice Lehrman said, they're not exactly relevant to your case, but to what the holding may look like. And so if you've got your outline written out in such a way that you can answer those questions and then sort of smoothly get back to the next point you wanted to make that you haven't gotten to yet on your outline, and hopefully it's on one page or two facing pages so you're not having to turn back and forth, it can be really fluid, and the best advocates are really good at doing that and transitioning from the answer to a question to their next point.
Thank you for the question. This is anybody's chance to come ask us the questions. We were asking all the questions. We were driving the show earlier, and this is your chance to ask us anything you'd like to. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Justice and Honorable Justices. My name is Christy Lopez. Thank you so much for being here today. This is such a fantastic opportunity. I know a lot of us are probably interested in becoming a judge at some point in our careers. I wanted to ask you if you have any advice for that path to judgeship and going from law student to lawyer to judge.
Justice Bland?
So there's a lot of ways to put yourself on a path to becoming a judge. And you can practice a lot of different kinds of law. You can be engaged in a lot of different kinds of activities. What I would say is, especially as a very young lawyer, to take on any challenge so that you can really cultivate a broad skill set, so that as these options for different career paths come your way, you can make an informed decision about what is right for you and your circumstances. And you'll have that bottom line skill set that would make you good at whatever the next step in the path is. So the steps can look different for different people, but you have to be excellent at being a lawyer in one way or another. And the way to do that at the very outset is to cultivate as many legal skills as you can. And then from then on, you can engage in activities that you think might help you become a judge. But I don't think there's you graduate from law school and there's not a preordained path to becoming a judge.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with Justice Bland. I would also add, don't ever take any job for the next job, because you won't do the job and the work that is in front of you at the level that it will take to develop the skills that Justice Bland said that you need, and attack it with the vigor you're going to need to do it. And then find things that you care enough about and work with people who are going to get the best out of you, who are going to mentor you, and don't go to a firm or a DA's office or OAG or a nonprofit or any of these things because someday I'm going to be a judge. Instead, work with good people and do the work that's ahead of you, show the excellence like Justice Bland talked about, and then it can probably work out, and then you too can take a pay cut someday.
But also I would add that it may not work out. There are a lot of people who want to become judges who really aren't ever able to become judges. I have a lot of friends like that. And so, like both of the prior justices have said, do your very best at whatever you're doing, and hopefully do something that you enjoy, because it's going to enable you to do it better. And then realize that if it doesn't work out that way, then that's fine too. And you can enjoy your professional life in spite of the fact that may not turn out.
Or,
go ahead.
When I was in law school, I had no intention of being a judge. I really didn't have any intention of practicing law. I came out of the corporate world. And I wanted a law degree just for the sake of having a law degree. And so here 25 years later, I wind up on the Texas Supreme Court. So even for those students who may be not thinking of that right now, it's still possible to live out your dream. And you certainly, you have to go through the political world in Texas. As you know, judges are elected. They can first be appointed, but then you still have to run for elections, which is a political element, which sometimes you don't fully appreciate until you're in the middle of that suit. But
Thank you.
I'll add one thing to that, which is that's all right. When I was thinking about going to law school, I never knew a lawyer. I didn't have any lawyers in the family, but a friend of mine, a guy at church, was a lawyer. I said, "Can we go to lunch?" I was thinking about going to law school, and he said, "Why do you want to go to law school?" And I said, "Well, I think I'd want to be a judge someday." And he said, "Jeff, you do not go to law school to be a judge. You don't start practicing law to be a judge. Put that out of your mind. Go if you want to go to law school and be a lawyer, great, but then look for opportunities." So I think I'd been practicing like 6 years, and a local Travis County district judge announced he was retiring. And someone else who was very active, Travis County is very blue, and someone very active in the Democratic Party said, to me, "You're pretty conservative, aren't you? Why don't you apply for this judgeship? Because Bush was governor, and he's going to appoint someone conservative, and we think we could live with you," is what this Democratic friend said, which I learned later meant we can live with you until the election when we, vote your rear out. But, and so that got me thinking about it. Well, I thought, I need guidance. I need advice. And I had gotten to know John Cornyn, who was then on this court, through the local Inns of Court. And I just called him out of the blue, and I said, "Justice Cornyn, this is what I've been told. What do you think?" And he said, "Well, I'll tell you what I think. Number one, if you apply, you're not going to get it, because just the nature of politics, a middle-aged white male is not who Governor Bush is probably looking for a Travis County bench." He said, "If I'm wrong about that, number two, and you get appointed, you're going to work really hard and lose the election. But number three, absolutely apply." That's what he said. And so I did. I applied, and Justice Sullivan just joined us after serving as kind of the governor's point person on helping the governor select who to appoint for judges. So he can tell you more about that than I can, especially under the current governor. But I applied, I went over, I interviewed. Governor Bush appointed a friend of mine, Ernest Garcia, to the bench, so number one was right. Ernest he was a good judge, and he ran really hard as a Republican and lost in Travis County, so he was right on that. And about a year and a half later, then General John Cornyn called and said, "I need a deputy attorney general for civil litigation, and I remember that you're interested in public service. Would you come talk to me about that?" So you never know. It just, but the lesson I learned from that is at some point when you're down there working hard as a lawyer, wherever you may be, some opportunity is going to come up, and don't be afraid to let people know you're interested in public service. And by doing that, people will know, and then you never know what doors that will open. So I think they're right. You got to keep your head down and work hard and be a problem solver at whatever you're doing, for other people to have the confidence in you to then give you the opportunity to do the next thing.
Thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
Hi, I just wanted to thank y'all, first of all, for this opportunity. My name is Evan Patel. I just started here like 2 weeks ago. This is just an incredible opportunity to kind of see the law, actually being played out at my school. And I just wanted to ask y'all, what was it that led y'all to go from law to judge? I know this is kind of similar-esque question to the previous one, but instead of being a lawyer, why did each of y'all go, take the role of judge? And I think specifically also I'd like to know why the Supreme Court of Texas, not like a federal court. What was it about this court that was really appealing to y'all?
Well, I'm calling someone who's made that move a couple of times, Justice Huddle.
For me, sort of very big picture, I'll start with the big picture and not the mechanics of how it happened, but the big picture was that I felt like, even before I started law school, a sort of calling to do something with my skill set, with my mind, that would contribute to sort of the greater good in the public, right? And so for a while, I thought that might look like public interest law. It turned out that that kind of job would not have earned me enough money to retire my law school debt, so I decided against going straight into public interest law, and I worked in private practice for many years. During that tenure, a couple of different things happened. One is I got a lot of experience very fast, and so I learned a lot in what feels now like a pretty short amount of time. And in that process, by sort of getting to know people farther ahead of me on their career trajectories, I started to learn what the skill set, what the life of judges looked like. And so I had many colleagues who had gone on to the bench. Justice Bland, for example, left the law firm where I practiced right before I got there, and so she was someone sort of in my orbit, and as were a number of folks. And so I started to see over time that I really liked the skill set. I really liked thinking I could see myself being a neutral, right, and deciding and adjudicating questions and really thinking deeply about the issues as opposed to being an advocate, although I really loved that too. And so that was the big picture, is how can I sort of give back, right, sort of a little. It sounds grandiose, but that was at the root of it. And then also, as I became more experienced, I realized that is something I would actually love to do. Being an appellate judge is very different. How you spend your day is very different from how you spend your day as an advocate. I really grew up a trial lawyer and not an appellate lawyer. And so in my day-to-day life, I didn't have hours and hours to think or write on a particular legal issue. And so it turns out that I really love being able to do this for big chunks of time. So it's slow, and I just would emphasize the importance of making the ask of people who are in sort of that orbit. How did this happen for you? What should I be doing to prepare myself in case lightning strikes and that opportunity arises for me?
And you asked about the difference between federal court and this court, and you're being on either of those courts, and that goes back to what we were talking about earlier, which is that the way our system works, and appropriately so, the judges don't decide which court they serve on. The judges don't decide whether they get to be a judge. The president makes that decision, the governor makes that decision, in some instances the people of Texas make that decision. It's never ultimately up to you, whether you are a judge, and if you are a judge, which court you serve on. And so that goes back to what Justice Lehrman was saying and what others were saying. All you can control is that you work hard and give your very best at what's in front of you in whatever capacity you're in. And if over time you develop the kind of reputation that people look at you and think, this guy might be a good judge, then that may happen for you or it may not. But it's not it's not something that goes to the person who is the most ambitious or works the hardest for it. It's something that sort of happens to you in a way. And in that way, it's not a goal you can put in front of yourself, like, oh, I want to start my own firm, or I want to practice this kind of law, or I want to do this, or you're not ultimately in control of whether you end up as a judge. And but you are in control of how hard you work and the things that you do that influence other people's perceptions of you and that build your reputation for integrity and excellence over the years. And so that's, I think, what you're hearing from all of us, is that's what you can control, and that's what you should be striving for if you have in mind that you might like to be a judge someday.
I agree with the chief, that it'll be something that you'd be called to do. You had asked about specific courts, and I can tell you, as the chief mentioned, my former client, I was lucky to counsel Governor Abbott on, I think he's now appointed 6 members of this court, including me, and so 5 out of 6 ain't bad. Did very well on those. And I was also fortunate enough in my practice, mostly my time in public service, to have also gotten to know Justice Lehrman and Justice Boyd and Justice Devine. And so one of the things that was very exciting to me about coming to this court is this is a collegial court, and I knew that I would have 8 outstanding and amazing colleagues, and I was right about that, and so I felt very fortunate to have been called to be in this place at this time. So, but as the chief said, you don't get to, there's not an order for him to say, I will simply be on, the Supreme Court of the United States and that sort of thing, but do your best, work hard, treat people well.
I'll share a story because he's brought it up. But before I served on this court, I served on the Intermediate Court of Appeals, the first Court of Appeals in Houston. And part of the process for getting on this court was going to an interview at the Capitol, in which now Justice Sullivan grilled me probably for 20 minutes about various opinions I'd written while I was on that court. So be ready for that.
Opinions that maybe he did not agree with.
I would also add, no, it's not yours to offer the job, but there are aspects of your life that may dictate whether it's right for you at a particular time in your life. And so one of the things that you always have to think about when you're making professional decisions or career decisions is, how does this impact the rest of my life? So, and I encourage you not to shy away from that, because a well-rounded life includes, family, friends who are like family. Maybe some of you have children now. Maybe you'll have children someday. And just remember, a professional occupation is a role that you occupy. That's why it's an occupation for a time. And what you may think about that role is different at different times in your life. And so don't forget to save the best part of yourself for your family.
And also, you asked something about federal court versus state court. And at least from an appellate perspective on the state Supreme Court, I think that while we are, a lot of different factors are at play as to whether or not we have the privilege of serving in this capacity. But once we are able to do that, the cases that we hear are extremely fascinating. We have discretionary review. We only grant review of cases that significantly affect the jurisprudence of the state of Texas. And so as opposed to, say, an Intermediate Court of Appeals, say the Fifth Circuit, at the federal level, they're mandatory review, just like our intermediate courts of appeals. So in a lot of ways, and I think if you talk to some of the people who have served on our court, like Don Willett or like Priscilla Richmond, they will tell you that the cases they heard here were much more fascinating, interesting than the cases that they heard on the federal level. But
She chose the 2 Baylor grads.
Right. Obviously, good choice, right? But there's other factors that come into play. For example, you once you're appointed to a federal bench, you don't have to run for election again. And so, there's some other factors that come on. But as far as the caliber of the work, it's really fascinating where we are.
Can I just add, you asked what it is that led us to the path, and for me, clerkships was a big part of it. I clerked for 2 really great judges, and that put in my heart the idea that seeing the way that they served the people with such integrity and diligence, that if that was really something they could devote their lives to, it was something that if the opportunity came, I would be honored to do it as well, and that really opened my eyes to it. Clerking is a great thing, not just for future judges, but for future lawyers. And there are a lot of courts in Texas where you can clerk, a lot of courts across the United States where you can. So I'd encourage any of you who are interested, particularly, but not only, in a litigating future, to consider a clerkship at a trial court or an appellate court in order to really see on the other side of the bench what it is that motivates judges and how decisions are reached, what it is that counts as a successful argument versus one that doesn't quite work, and why. And that's an enriching experience that will serve you and your clients very well for the rest of your lives, whether you actually become a judge or not.
And we do need more Baylor Law clerks. The only one on the court this year I was fortunate to inherit from Chief Justice Hecht, but your ceremonial marshal today, Courtney Sorrell, is a graduate of this fine law school. And thank you for keeping us safe today, Courtney.
All right, thank you. I believe we're probably overdue for lunch. Did we have just one more quick question, maybe?
Thank you so much for being here, and to the law school for providing this opportunity. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a PhD student in material science. I know nothing about the law. I figured out like a couple minutes ago that the first person listed in the case name is the plaintiff. I was really confused. So I guess my question for me...
It's actually more complicated.
Yeah, you're wrong, but that's okay.
Back to the lab. So I have to vote for you all. I have to vote for judges in the state of Texas. Me, my engineering buddies, a bunch of non-lawyers. I'm wondering what you all would want us to consider when we vote for judges, like in the primary and in the general, there's the party, but especially in the primary and earlier. Like, what should I be looking for? What should my friends be looking for when we decide who the judges are? And don't just say incumbency, because like, that's...
Well, we'll say whatever we want. Anybody want to take that?
I think that's a great question.
It is.
And I wish that more people across our state really asked that question, because it wasn't always the case that in Texas, judges were elected. It started off where the president of Texas and then eventually the governor of Texas would nominate, and the Senate would confirm for a period of years the judges. And then it came to the legislature's notice that maybe they weren't making the best choices, and perhaps the people in each community would know who was the most responsible, who was sober, who had good judgment, who was kind and responsive, and the kind of person that could exercise this massive authority over the citizens. And they said, well, it'd be the people in the community. Let's let them choose. They didn't anticipate that we would eventually have counties where we would need hundreds of judges, and nobody can know everybody can know a judge. And there are parts of our state where there's a judge, basically. And you can know that person and basically have the same kind of information that our ancestors did 150, 200 years ago. But for the most part, it's very difficult, even for lawyers, let alone mechanical engineers, to know what it is that would distinguish this human being from that human being, which is going to be a better family law judge, which is going to be a better criminal court judge or an appellate judge. The way I think to find out is a number of things. First, find people that you trust that really do know, that are deeply in practice, and that you believe they're going to give you advice, not just based on if it's their friend or something like that, but based on their deep experience with the courts. Second, all judges have to run in our state, and they're always happy to see people. So if you're in McLennan County and there's a primary election, a couple people would like to be your district judge, they'll have events, and they would be thrilled if you come up and say to them, all right, tell me, how is it that you are going to be able to comply with the promise you just made, that I will not legislate from the bench. I'll apply the law as written and not as I wish that it had been written. Things like that. All judges and candidates for judge say that. But if they can explain how they can do it to your satisfaction by saying things like, for example, well, my job generally is to take a look at a piece of paper, maybe a lot of paper. Contracts can be hundreds of pages long. Statutes can be dozens of pages, or even sometimes hundreds if it's a whole code. Do they have the skill to even understand the obligation to be able to figure out what those words and the relevant text meant to the people that they were written for at the time that they were written, and to be able to then say, my job is to figure out what that was 100 years ago, if it was a statute or a contract or a deed or something like that that was written 100 years ago, to figure out what those words meant to ordinary speakers of English, and then to be able to say whether I like it or not, that's what the law is, and I'm going to apply it. And if they can't even answer that question, then maybe you move on to the next candidate. But if they can honestly give you a sense that they are committed to the idea that judges are different from the other two branches of government, that our job is oftentimes, Justice Lehrman has said this many times, our job is not to like our rulings. Our oath instead is to make sure that they're the most accurate we can make them under what the law is. And that requires people who are experts in the construction of statutes and the interpretation of constitutional provisions. We probably shouldn't have judges who are 22, even if they're really smart, because it requires experience and judgment. And that's something that ordinary people can, if they're willing to invest the time, and particularly if you gather up with others and divide the load, you can actually make a difference in choosing people who don't just have nice last names. There are studies that show that if you have a name that has a color in your name, for example, that's a nice little bump in the polls. Or if your name is an ordinary Anglo-Saxon word like young, it's a little bump in the polls. What a terrible, I'll take whatever I can get. But I'd rather win the election based on the idea that.
How about divine?
Divine, come on, right? It would be better for us all if we knew that the people chose us because they really believe that we're able to discharge the oath that we take. But I'm afraid there are a lot of people who show up to the polls and don't really know. And sometimes they just decide not to vote in a judicial election. That's unfortunate, but it's even more unfortunate if they just say, well, that name sounds better, that's prettier, that's a male, I'll vote for him, or that's a female, I'll vote for her, without any other information. And so the people of Texas have more tools for self-government than any population in the history of planet Earth. That's what our ancestors gave us. The tools of self-government are massive in our state, including choosing people who will even exercise judicial power at the lowest levels of the judiciary. But if we don't use those tools wisely, we'll get what we deserve sooner or later. And we've been pretty lucky, honestly, in our state, despite often having voters who don't really go to the trouble and don't know how to go to the trouble if they wanted to. So I think it's a wonderful question, and I hope you'll keep thinking about that.
Can I add one thing?
Sure.
It's a brilliant question, by the way. So if you're pro-choice or pro-life, if you're pro-gun or pro-gun reform, if you're whatever, pick your issue, and it's time to go to the polls, and you do your research, your legislators, your executive branch officials, figure out if they're pro-choice, pro-life, pro-gun reform, whatever, and vote for the ones that represent the policy choices that matter to you. The hard part about judges is when all of you guys and your neighbors and your friends start seeing us as another way to promote your policy choice, whatever the issue is, which I think we're seeing more and more in the last 10, 20 years, the judiciary becoming, the public more and more considering the judiciary as just another political branch, undermines the entire role that our judicial system plays. So I can confidently say that 99 out of 100 judges I've ever known know better than that. They may have a policy choice, but when they put on the black robe, they know it doesn't matter. And what I really urge you guys to do, because I think it's so important for the future of our form of government, is find out if the judge is driven by policy choices, and if those policy preferences of that individual are going, and I don't care, left or right, are going to determine how they judge, and vote them out, vote against them. Not because I'm for that or that, this or that policy choice, but because when the public starts treating the judiciary and the judiciary responds by becoming just another political branch, we've really undermined the rule of law in our country. And I think that's a real risk right now for the 20 years ahead of us.
Thank you. Great
thank
question.
you all.
Great questions from everybody. We appreciate your time. And as I said, it's an honor to have been here with you today. We're headed to lunch where I think we'll see a few of you. And God bless you all. Thanks again.
We are going to take some pictures.
All right.
But everyone is free to go. The court's going to stay for just a minute while we take some pictures. The photographer is here for us.